Aloha and welcome to Betty's Real Estate Corner, brought to you by Sakamoto Properties, where prestige is our business, reputation our foundation. In the studio today, I've got someone that's never come here with me before, been a good friend for, I think, 25 years, Dayle Spencer. And I'm going to introduce you a little bit, tell you a few things about her, and then I'm hoping she's going to step up and share a lot of information about what she's done in her lifetime. She was a federal prosecutor in Atlanta. She did some amazing things while she was in that position. She worked with President Carter in the International Negotiating Network, and she did conflicts such as North and South Korea. She actually set up the process that was utilized in the negotiating that was done by President Carter. So I think there's so much of a story. There are 50 countries that she worked in. So I'm going to have her kind of fill in some of that, and we're going to bounce some ideas. We've been close enough that we're a little worried we could get the giggles going if we allowed ourselves to, but I think that, she's lived on Maui off and on. Her children graduated from Seabury Hall. They reside in West Maui and now have a business called Pangea Group, where they do a variety of things. It's kind of pretty amazing, but they do conflict negotiation for a variety of companies worldwide. And then they also do a transitions thing here in Maui. And transitions would be someone, the long and short of it, I would say, someone that's in a major change in their life. They could be retiring, they could be changing jobs, they could be in a medical situation that changed their life. But they would come to Dayle and her husband, Will Spencer, and do some sort of a transition thing. It might be individually, it could be as a group. But I'm going to have Dayle say hello here and then give us a little bit of information on transitions and the other things that she's done. Welcome to the show, Dayle Spencer.
Thank you, Betty. It's wonderful to be on your show at last. And you're right, you have been talking to me about this radio program for some time, and I'm glad we were able to work it out to be with you today.
Perfect timing.
And like your theme song, I love Hawaii, so it's a real pleasure to be, especially on the air in my own backyard in Maui. Thank you for that lovely introduction. That was very nice. I sometimes refer to myself as a recovering lawyer, actually. I spent a decade as a federal prosecutor in Alabama, and it was a really intense period of time, but I hope I've come a long way, literally and metaphysically, from that place and have grown and learned from it. The kinds of experiences that I had in the almost decade that I worked for former President Carter were also life-changing. They were in Civil War situations where we would go into a conflict like in the Sudan or in Ethiopia or in Liberia, for example, and try to find a way to help the parties come to a peace agreement so that instead of continuing to kill each other, in Ethiopia, for example, they've been at war for 36 years. And poverty and so many terrible things comes as a consequence of a country being decimated like that. And so we would try to elevate them to a different standard of living and a different way of dealing with their differences. And that's how this whole idea of an international negotiating network was born, so that the Civil War situations could finally get the attention they deserve, since the United Nations can't get involved in those internal conflicts.
Dayle, I remember you once telling me that at any given time there were X number of conflicts going on in the world. And I don't remember a number, but I remember looking it up and discovering this monumental thing. And I would assume to this day that if we were checking how many conflicts that are almost wars or actually are wars are going on today that you're aware of.
Well, if you define a war as a conflict in which 1,000 or more people are killed, to distinguish that from a skirmish or something less than a war, if you define it in that way, at any given time, there are about 36 wars being waged throughout the world. And the great majority of those wars are internal, within a nation. Like when our own country went through the Civil War between the North and the South, or when many other countries have done that in subsequent generations, the United Nations, which is the only tribunal globally that becomes involved legitimately in wars, they have no jurisdiction when it's internal. And so these civil wars can go on for decades or for generations without resolution, precisely because they don't get the attention they need. Ireland, and Liberia, and Ethiopia, Eritrea, and so many places in the world have suffered tremendously for decades for lack of political will.
Ireland is, I happen to be 100% Irish, so I grew up with this knowledge of a war going on in Ireland that simplistically was about religion. You know, there were the Protestants to the north and the Catholics to the south, and it was always hard for me to imagine it. And Dayle actually did some help in the resolutions there in Ireland, and I do think Ireland is pretty calm these days.
It is much better than it has been for a very long time. President Clinton was instrumental in bringing a level of détente to the situation in Ireland. You're right, there was an underlayer of religious differences and religious intolerance that were part of that. There was also a political underlayer because the British were not welcomed in Northern Ireland, and you know, anywhere you go in the north you would see signs that say Brits out. They did not want them in their country. But there was a huge economic layer to that conflict as well. The north was so impoverished relative to the south, and jobs were just not available. And so when people are unemployed and they have no motivation to make their lives better, and they don't see the future as hopeful, it's easy enough to fall into blame and hatred and using someone else as a scapegoat or a reason for your troubles. And that's a classic dynamic that you experience in Civil War situations where poverty is one of the underlying causes. And certainly in the Irish conflict, which, by the way, wouldn't rise to the level of a war except sporadically. Mostly it was just a conflict between the North and the South. But there was an awful lot of blaming the other side for the lack of resources or the problems, the troubles, as they were called.
Well, again, I grew up with that being the biggest thing in the world, as there was always someone in my family that was from Ireland, talking about Ireland, going back, etc. So, I mean, that one was a little bit closer than other conflicts to me. And yet, when I realized at one point that there were probably 36 to 40 at the time I was looking it up, conflicts going on, that maybe some of them were at a war status, but like you said, Ireland probably went in and out of war status. You know, one thing I think I'm going to quickly say, remembering that this is Betty's Real Estate Corner, is that you can reach us for real estate, and today we're going to kind of skip over real estate, but at Sakamoto Properties, 669-0070, that's 808-669-0070. You can check us out at sakamotoproperties.com. Find us on Twitter at Maui Sakamoto, or connect with us using hashtag Betty Maui Radio. So I'll probably toss that out again at the end, but I just feel like every time I talk to Dayle, I'm astounded by her knowledge and what she's done and the places that she's been. Today she was telling me a little bit about if she was traveling in the African nations, how if she was in, she needed 2 passports. Tell us a little about that, because that really was unusual.
This is during the period of time in which I worked for former President Carter, that decade of my life. But South Africa was under the system of apartheid, which was a racially divided, segregated system where it was, if you were black, get back. I mean, they so discriminated against any person of color in that nation, and the rest of the world condemned the apartheid system. And if you were a traveler and you went to South Africa and you cleared customs in that country, of course they would put an entry stamp in your passport. If you left South Africa and tried to enter many other nations in the world, especially any other nation in Africa, the entire continent of Africa, you would not be allowed to enter because they would assume that you were a sympathizer or somehow supporting the apartheid regime. And since they were trying to eliminate apartheid globally, you just wouldn't be allowed to travel anywhere else except South Africa. So what happened, because we were trying to end apartheid too, but in order to negotiate, you have to meet with all parties. And so it was necessary to go to South Africa to do that. And so I had to have a separate passport just for travel to South Africa, and then a different passport for travel to the rest of the world. And, I would use my South Africa passport only for entry and exit into that country, and then my other passport, which was pretty thick, for everywhere else.
And that was an acceptable thing to do, to have two passports.
Totally, the State Department was
Mhm.
100% supportive of it. It was not a secret at all. I had to have permission to do that. But certainly we went with the full understanding of the State Department that was really the only way to try to have a peace process that would honor both sides. You can't negotiate an end to a conflict, whatever the conflict is, whether it's domestic within a family or between neighbors in a neighborhood. You can't negotiate a solution unless you're able to work with all the parties. And in South Africa, that even meant working with the white regime that was creating most of the problems.
Interesting, to say the least, interesting. But that, to me, learning about the passports by itself was kind of a monumental thing, the thought of carrying two passports. And I would almost think at some point the fear that somebody would find the other passport if you were in other countries.
That wasn't so much the fear as, for me personally, as one time I was in South Africa and I was interviewing a youth who had actually been tortured by the police and military. They were beaten with a thing called a sjambok, and it's like a rubber whip. And I'd taken photographs of their injuries and intended, when I came back, to write about it in newspaper articles that would be nationally syndicated. And so I was trying to bring out of the country one of these weapons that they were using for torture. And I was actually stopped in customs in South Africa, and had they searched my suitcase, which was on the conveyor belt at the time, they would have found this evidence that I was later going to be using against them in the human rights articles that I was writing. And fortunately they did not. That was the greatest fear for me. It was not a fear of them knowing that I had two passports. It was a fear of them knowing that I would publicly write against their interests, because there was no room for negotiation at that point, and so the human rights violations needed to be made public.
Dayle and her husband Will have a website, pangea-group.com, and you could take a look at that. One of the things they do is they do work with a lot of companies worldwide, that some of them come to Maui, they travel a lot and go to other countries, but working within the organizations trying to help with what in even a small office you could call a conflict. When things aren't going good and you really need someone to assist you, that basically and simplistically is what they do. But they also have this other part of their business, and because we only have a half hour, we're probably going to have to get into that now. But I think it's another very interesting thing, transitions, and probably currently you're doing quite a few of the transitions. I'm not sure exactly what to call them, but transitions, a program, the transitions programs. But I think it's really pretty amazing. And again, it could be a small company that's sending over some people. I remember some companies a few years back that had to lay off a lot of people, but we're still trying to take care of their people and assist them, that would send them to do a transitions program. Or I think Dayle and Will traveled around the world again for that, to work with people, work with the companies to assist people in how they move on with their lives. Can you fill us in a little on how that works and why it works?
Sure. If you think about this, Betty, at kind of a global level or a macro level, even in the peace negotiations that we were doing, it was really all about managing change, whether it was change from a civil war situation to a peaceful society, or in this case, personal individual change, where people are going through a major juncture in their life. It could be a midlife change, it could be a change in status such as divorce, or it could be something inside them telling them that it was time to alter whatever they had been doing. So people come and spend a week with us on Maui in our Maui Transition Center program, and we use it as kind of a course correction in life. It's a chance to look back at your entire life with some thoughtfulness and reflection, and to consider the junctures, the decisions that you have made up to this point in your life, and to really drill down into what is it that you want to do with the time you have remaining. None of us know if we have an hour, a day, a decade, or just tomorrow remaining, but we do have choices about how we spend that time, whatever the length of the time happens to be. And transitions is a place where people can come and get out of their normal busy activities to be quiet and reflective. And we've developed this process based on our corporate experience, where principles of managing change can be used for major life changes as well as corporate changes or even political changes within nations.
I liked how you called it a course correction.
Yeah.
You know, because I think that's kind of again, I like little simplistic things, but I think in a lot of cases we all are on a course in our lives, and maybe we don't need a whole major change, but a course correction. I kind of liked the sound of that. I kind of get that.
Well, here's an example of what I'm talking about. Bad things happen to all of us. You know, the question is, what do you do with the opportunity that's presented to you by something bad happening to you? Your choices are, you can choose to see yourself as a victim. You can choose to see this as somehow being inflicted on you. You can choose to look at it and say, okay, that thing happened, now what? Or even, that thing happened, how do I learn from that? How do I grow from that? And what happens is, when people make a choice after some bad thing happened to them, when they make a choice to stay in victimhood, the consequences of the bad thing that happened are magnified. But if you make a different choice, which is a more positive choice, to say, this thing happened, there's no denying it, what can I learn from that? Or how can I grow from that? Or how can I take that and make something useful from it? Then you limit the actual impact that the bad thing had on you, and you might also have the possibility to take the bad thing and use it productively.
Again, monumental statements. I mean, I could take those and probably pull them apart a little bit, and because I've talked to you enough, I guess I could do that. But again, I think on a day-to-day, when you have someone come in, it seems to me that you have someone, you meet with them. I've been in your office when you have some amazing little tidbits up on the wall, which I really like, and frankly, I can't think of one of them right now. I should have written them down ahead of time. But I've liked seeing that, you know, it'll be kind of like a couple little, can you think of any of them that have been up there recently? Little,
I was working with a client just yesterday who's trying to make a major life decision about, are they going to stay in Hawaii? They live in Kauai, actually. Are they going to stay in Kauai, or are they going to move back to the mainland? And Goethe has a great quote about that. If there's anything you dream you can do or want to do, begin it. Because deciding something has power and magic in it, and you begin now. And so it's I've only paraphrased it because I don't remember it exactly, but it's just that thought that whatever it is that you want to do in your life, get on with it.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I've always liked the theory of the pebble in the pond. You know, sometimes if you've got something that you want to do and you start talking about it, and you need to do this, but then it would do that, and it would trigger this, and that would happen, and you can't really do it, et cetera, et cetera. If you do one little thing, you put one foot in front of the other, or you make one tiny change, that's the pebble.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, everything around you somewhat changes because you did make one tiny, tiny move.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You threw the pebble.
When you're throwing that pebble,
Mm-hmm.
you're clarifying your intentions. My intention is to take that step. And when your intentions are clear, it is amazing how the universe lines up to support you. When you declare what it is that you intend to do, then suddenly all this energy around you lines up to give you the thing that you're clear about. And pathways appear, and obstacles are removed, and things happen. It seems like magic. I mean, Goethe called it magic, but I think it's really, Wayne Dyer would say it's the power of intention.
Well, I think that is, I mean, as I said, the pebble in the pond is something that's always been pretty clear to me, and I think it is amazing whatever someone's doing. Partially, I think what you just said struck me is, you know, sometimes if someone needs to make a change in their life for whatever reason, maybe there's been illness and they need to do something, there's been divorce, there's been a lot of things. People have seen you a certain way, so they don't talk about it. They don't want to maybe discuss the illness. They don't want to make it harder. They don't want to say you should get divorced, you shouldn't get divorced. They don't really want to get into it. But what you're saying kind of is, if the person makes the first stand, if they kind of declare their intentions, all of a sudden life can change because everyone around them will adapt to what they're trying to change to.
That's right. And what really changed was you.
Yes.
You know,
okay.
when you shift, we all shift. And so if it is to be, let it begin with me, you know, and you know, if you want to change something, the first thing you have to do is change yourself, no matter what the thing is. And when you shift, the energy around you will shift. Your family will shift, your colleagues will shift, the community will shift.
You know, I always love that Michael Jackson song, I'm looking at the man in the mirror.
And it's me.
And it's me, exactly.
Right.
I think that's really great. Well, you know, I think if somebody is looking to reach Dayle and Will, I'm sure that they could discuss what they do if it is something. And again, I think probably the Pangaea, Pangaea -group.com will get you in there. I kind of went over and I read Dayle's biography over the last couple of days because I knew she was going to be here. Very amazing biography, and you could definitely take a look at it. But you know, between Jimmy Carter and her period of time as the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, etc., it really is amazing. The companies they worked for, like Arthur Andersen, Mercedes-Benz North America, Bell South, Anderson Consulting, and I don't know. I mean, I just think that for Maui, we have an amazing resource here that we would never have had if Dayle and Will didn't step into this. Oh, wait a minute, excuse me. If we didn't sell Dayle and Will a house 20-some years ago.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
And get them here on Maui. So it all starts with a real estate deal.
Comes right back to Roy and Betty Sakamoto.
It's right back.
The truth of the matter is, when we decided to move to Maui, we sent out 3 letters to realtors from the mainland asking for advice and input about real estate. Roy Sakamoto was the one realtor who responded to those letters, and you guys ended up selling us not only a house in Pineapple Hill, but a golf villa. We had a ridge villa for a period of time, and we recently bought a house at Alaialoa. All were purchased and sold through Sakamoto Properties. So I perhaps have some sort of record as being one of your best customers.
She is definitely one of our best customers, and we've definitely had fun looking at real estate over the years, because all of a sudden something has changed with them, and then we've kind of gone and started again, kind of the process, because they sold the Pineapple Hill house when the kids were still going to school at Seabury Hall.
And Lahaina Luna, I might add. Our oldest
that's
is
right.
a Lahaina Luna graduate.
There is a Lahaina Luna graduate. So Seabury Hall, Lahaina Luna, really they've been, and they're great Maui supporters. They've helped us a lot with Heli Makua. She doesn't maybe know it yet, but I know that she is going to help us a little with Lahaina Luna High School. I've been kind of
recruiting.
I've been recruiting and thinking about that for a while. Well, you know, we've just passed our 2-minute warning. We're probably pushing down to a 1-minute warning. So why don't I say again, if you want to talk about real estate, which is what we think we're really doing here, give us a call at Sakamoto Properties, 808-669-0070. Check us out at sakamotoproperties.com, which has all of our listings. It gets you into the MLS. You know, I had a couple of people that called me recently. Actually, here's the embarrassing one though. I had somebody that I was showing property through another broker. And when I met the client, he said, oh my God, I look at your website all the time. And I'm thinking, well, why didn't you call me? But for whatever reason, he was telling me that they look at our website all the time. Obviously, they came and they met someone, because the bottom line is meeting that special person that you can work with. But I do love, we have this great website that's been set up for us by Chris from Meyer Computer. And you can reach him at meyercomputer.com when you're looking for it. So we're going to wind down here pretty quickly, and we're going to have some music coming back on. So hang on there. And here we have Danny Couch again. I love Hawaii, and I love Hawaii.
Mahalo, Betty.
Thank you, Dayle. Mahalo.